I discovered that the Sunset Reef Community Association was building 100 luxury condos on my inherited estate near Coral Bay, but when I found my grandfather's original property surveys, their entire development suddenly became my legal property. I still remember that early summer morning when the call came in from Mrs. Delgado, my grandfather's longtime neighbor of over 35 years. Her trembling voice told me that heavy construction machines had already begun tearing into the eastern fields of what I had always known as our family's land. Without a second thought, I packed a small bag, grabbed my keys, and drove the 5 hours from the city to Coral Bay at breakneck speed. The memories of childhood summers spent playing in those sprawling grounds flooding back with every mile. When I turned onto the winding dirt road leading to my grandfather's old seaside mansion, the sight was almost too surreal to bear. The gentle landscape of saltwash trees and undulating dunes had been replaced by a cacophony of bulldozers, excavators, and workers in hard hats marking off sections of land with broad swathes of bright orange paint. In the distance, a huge sign proclaimed in bold letters, "Future home of Sunset Reef East condos, starting at $500,000. I parked my car at the edge of a long gravel driveway and made my way slowly toward a woman standing apart from the frenetic scene. She wore impeccably tailored navy trousers and a crisp white blouse, her hair arranged in a perfect chignon, her expression as cool and detached as if she were presiding over a corporate board meeting rather than an active construction site. "Excuse me," I said firmly once she ended her phone call. "What exactly is happening here?" She regarded me coolly as if I were an unwelcome interruption. "We are preparing for a new residential development," she replied in a measured tone, extending a business card. "My name is Vanessa Monroe, president of the Sunset Reef Community Association. Everything is in order. This is our land." I stared at her for a moment, my pulse quickening. "This is my land," I declared, my voice rising with disbelief. "My grandfather, Joseph Miller, owned this estate. I inherited it when he passed away just last March, and he never sold a single acre." Vanessa's smile faltered for a split second before she recovered with a cool, dismissive air. "There must be some misunderstanding. The sale was finalized 9 months ago, and we have all the permits and approvals required for this project." I felt a chill run down my spine. The estate had been in my family for generations. I remembered the stories my grandfather had told me about how he swore the land would always remain in the family, that he would never let anyone steal its legacy away. At his funeral, he had quietly mentioned that he was working on something behind the scenes, a secret safeguard against developers, but I had never had the heart to search through his old office until now. That evening, under the fading light of a coastal sunset, I returned to the old mansion and began the painful task of rummaging through the dusty remains of my grandfather's study. The room smelled of aged paper and pipe tobacco, and shelves lined with faded photo albums and worn farming almanacs bore silent witness to decades of careful record-keeping. I opened a creaking wooden filing cabinet and started to pull out yellowed folders sorted by year. Hours passed as I scanned through documents until, just as fatigue threatened to overtake me, I noticed a loose floorboard beneath the heavy desk. With a surge of hope, I pressed it with my foot until it shifted slightly. Kneeling down, I pried it open with an old letter opener. Inside, concealed in a small, rusted metal box, was the deed to the estate along with a series of original property surveys dating back to 1910, plus a handwritten letter addressed to me in my grandfather's elegant script. The letter began with the simple words, "If you are reading this, then you must know the truth." It went on to explain that developers had long been eyeing our land, but he had always resisted, protecting every inch of it. He warned that one day, if anyone tried to take what was rightfully ours, they would find that the legal boundaries were not what the county records said. He had even attached a copy of the original survey that clearly showed our estate extended far beyond the lines now recorded. As I read, my heart pounded with a mix of sorrow and righteous anger. I knew then that I could not let them take away not only my inheritance but also the legacy of generations of hard work and love. Determined to confront this injustice, I sought the help of HOA and Gwen, an old friend and trusted legal advisor who had grown up in Coral Bay and understood the intricacies of local property law. HOA had always been a pillar of support in my family and had the keen mind of someone who could unravel even the most tangled bureaucratic mess. I called him immediately, and by early the next morning, he and I met at a small cafe overlooking the harbor. Over steaming cups of strong coffee, I laid out the evidence, copies of the original surveys, the deed, and my grandfather's heartfelt letter. HOA listened intently, nodding slowly as he absorbed every detail. "This is extraordinary," HOA said, his voice low and thoughtful. The boundary records in the county are clearly fraudulent. Whoever changed those records must have had powerful connections and a lot to gain from selling off your grandfather's land. This is not just a property dispute. It is a calculated scam designed to steal a family legacy. With HOA's analytical mind and steadfast determination fueling our resolve, we agreed on a plan. First, we needed to contact a prominent property lawyer in Coral Bay, Mr. Walter Franklin, known for his expertise in land disputes. Together, HOA and I, armed with the incontrovertible evidence, would file for an emergency injunction to halt all construction immediately. I knew that time was of the essence. Every day that passed meant more of my grandfather's land being lost to crooked deals and manipulated records. That afternoon, I drove to Mr. Franklin's modest yet imposing office in downtown Coral Bay. After a brief explanation of my situation, I spread the documents across his large mahogany desk. Walter's eyes widened as he compared the 1910 survey with the current county maps. According to these documents, he said slowly, tracing the boundary lines with a callous finger, your estate actually extends an additional 80 acres to the east. That extra land encompasses not only part of the planned condo site, but also several structures that the county claims are private developments. This is a clear case of fraudulent boundary adjustments. Walter immediately filed for an emergency injunction to pause the construction. His secretary informed me that the judge had granted a temporary halt on all building activity and that a hearing would be scheduled in a matter of days. I felt a glimmer of hope amidst the turmoil, but I knew the battle was far from over. The Sunset Reef Community Association, led by Vanessa Monroe, was a well-oiled machine with deep pockets and influential allies. I braced myself for the inevitable counterattacks. That evening, with the injunction in hand, I returned to the estate and made my way to the community center in Coral Bay, a repurposed town hall that served as the meeting place for the residents of the Sunset Reef development. I had arranged an emergency community meeting, determined to reveal the truth behind the fraudulent land records. Flyers had been distributed, and by the time dusk fell, nearly 400 homeowners and local residents had gathered, their faces a mixture of concern and curiosity. Standing at the front of the packed auditorium, I cleared my throat and began. My name is Ethan Carter, and I recently inherited what I believe to be my grandfather's historic estate. However, I discovered that the Sunset Reef Community Association is building luxury condos on land that, according to original surveys and my grandfather's own words, legally belongs to my family. I have here copies of the 1910 survey, updated in 1978, that clearly show our property boundaries extending far beyond what is recorded today. I stand before you not only to reclaim what is rightfully mine, but to protect this entire community from a scheme that would strip us of our heritage and our future. A murmur spread throughout the crowd as I detailed the evidence, holding up each document for all to see. I described how Vanessa Monroe had claimed the property with cold precision, insisting that all permits and approvals were in order. I explained how the records had been manipulated in 1984 and again in 1997, erasing nearly 80 acres from our estate and handing them over to a network of shell companies connected to the association. My voice trembled with emotion as I recounted my grandfather's final warning, the words that had been hidden away in a secret compartment of his old desk. If they say I sold my land, it is a lie, he had written. The truth is in the boundaries I drew decades ago. As I finished my presentation, the room exploded into heated discussion. Some residents were incredulous, demanding answers about their own property rights. Others wept quietly, their faces reflecting years of unspoken fear of being forced out by aggressive developers. I could see the shifting tides of opinion, and as voices rose in unison, I knew I had struck a nerve. I ask you all, I said, my tone firm yet pleading, to stand with me. Share your stories, share your doubts, and let us join together to demand transparency and fairness from those who seek to control our community. Please leave your ratings and comments below if you believe that our fight for justice and heritage is one worth winning. The meeting lasted for hours, and by its close, a grassroots coalition had formed, the Meadow Bay Community Coalition. Over the next few weeks, supported by local attorneys, investigative journalists, and the passionate voices of our residents, we began to unravel the corrupt network behind the Sunset Reef project. HOA and Gwyn played a crucial role, working tirelessly to expose fraudulent permits and questionable transactions. Together, we discovered that several key county officials and even some members of the planning board had been bribed to approve the manipulated records. Every revelation fueled our determination to push forward, even as threats and harassment from Vanessa Monroe's camp grew more frequent and overt. Late one rainy night, While reviewing newly obtained county records in the dim light of my study, I received an anonymous text message urging me to be cautious. The sender claimed to have evidence that Vanessa Monroe had personally ordered intimidation tactics against dissenting homeowners. My heart pounded as I shared the message with HOA. "This is getting dangerous," he murmured, his eyes scanning the text. "They are not just stealing land. They are silencing those who dare to speak out." I knew then that our battle was entering a critical phase. In response, I arranged a secret meeting with a group of like-minded residents at an old warehouse on the outskirts of Coral Bay. The air was thick with tension as we huddled together, the sound of rain tapping on corrugated metal overhead. One by one, we recounted our stories, tales of sudden fines for unapproved landscaping, unexpected code violations, and even threats from security personnel dispatched by the HOA. A middle-aged woman named Marisol, whose small bistro had been forced to relocate after receiving a series of unjust fines, spoke with quiet fury about how her livelihood was being squeezed out. An elderly gentleman, Mr. Ramirez, tearfully recalled how he had been harassed repeatedly until he finally sold his home at a fraction of its value. Each story painted a damning picture of a system rigged against the ordinary people of Coral Bay. With our resolve steeled by shared suffering, we voted unanimously to form a legal defense fund and to escalate our protest efforts. HOA, with his unmatched legal acumen, began drafting a lawsuit that would not only halt the construction immediately but also seek compensation for every homeowner who had been wronged. In parallel, I reached out to a renowned investigative journalist, Caroline Bates, who had a reputation for exposing corruption in local government. Caroline agreed to meet with me and review all the evidence, promising that if our claims were substantiated, she would make sure that the story reached every corner of the nation. The media frenzy that followed was overwhelming. Headlines in the Coral Bay Gazette blared, "Legacy stolen, developer fraud in Coral Bay exposed, and family fights back. Inherited land becomes battleground for justice." Caroline's report, packed with explosive documents and eyewitness testimonies, sent shockwaves through the community. Under mounting public pressure, the county commission was forced to launch an independent investigation into the boundary changes and the role of the Sunset Reef Community Association. Vanessa Monroe, once so confident and unflappable, now appeared visibly rattled in public appearances. In a press conference held in a Stark government hall, she insisted that all permits were legitimate and that the project would proceed as planned, but her words were met with skeptical glares and pointed questions from reporters. Days turned into weeks, and as the legal proceedings advanced, a sense of cautious optimism began to spread among the residents. Yet the fight was far from over. On one particularly tense afternoon, I received a visit from a county inspector who looked grave. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice low, "we have found discrepancies in the most recent property records. There is evidence that a significant boundary adjustment was recorded in 1997 under circumstances that cannot be explained by normal procedures." I listened in disbelief as he explained that the adjustment not only reduced your estate by nearly 80 acres but also transferred critical portions of land, including areas already occupied by homes and community facilities, to entities tied to the HOA. The inspector's revelation confirmed our worst fears. This was a deliberate act of fraud. Fueled by this new information, HOA and I intensified our efforts. We hired a team of expert surveyors to verify the original boundaries, and their report unequivocally confirmed that our property extended well beyond the lines drawn in the county records. Armed with this irrefutable evidence, we were ready to take our case to court. The courtroom battles were grueling, filled with endless testimony from experts, heated cross-examinations, and attempts by Vanessa Monroe's legal team to discredit our findings. I spent countless sleepless nights poring over documents, my mind replaying my grandfather's quiet words and the promise he had made that his legacy would never be taken from our family. At one point during the trial, when the opposing counsel tried to introduce a set of falsified documents as evidence of a legitimate sale, HOA stood up and calmly laid out the timeline, cross-referencing every detail with our original surveys. His precise articulation of the discrepancies brought the courtroom to a stunned silence. I could see even the judge's eyes narrow as the weight of the evidence settled over the proceedings. The tension in the room was palpable as one expert after another confirmed that the boundary adjustments were not only highly irregular but also supported by fraudulent signatures and misplaced decimal points that had been overlooked by county officials for decades. Outside the courthouse, as protesters gathered with banners demanding justice for the community and for the preservation of family legacies, I felt a profound connection to every person who had ever been victimized by such systemic corruption. I stood side by side with my fellow residents, some of whom had lost their homes, others whose lives had been upended by exorbitant fines and unjust evictions. Their voices joined in a chorus of defiance as we marched through the streets of Coral Bay, our footsteps a steady drumbeat of solidarity. "We will not be silenced," someone shouted, and the crowd erupted in cheers. In the midst of this burgeoning movement, I received a text from Caroline Bates urging me to attend a live televised debate on local property rights that evening. The debate promised to pit advocates for transparency and community empowerment against representatives of the developers and their political allies. With HOA by my side and my heart heavy with both grief and determination, I took the stage on national television. I recounted my story, the discovery of my grandfather's surveys, the betrayal of the records, and the devastating impact on my family and neighbors. I called upon viewers to join us, to leave their ratings and comments, and to let their voices be heard in the fight for justice. My words resonated with viewers across the country, sparking a wave of public support that further isolated the crooked interests behind the Sunset Reef project. As the trial reached its climax, an unexpected twist shook the very foundations of the case. An anonymous whistleblower, claiming to be a former employee of the association, stepped forward with audio recordings and internal emails that revealed a deliberate conspiracy between several high-ranking county officials and the developers. The recordings detailed meetings in which the boundary adjustments were discussed as a necessary business maneuver and even mentioned a friendly arrangement with local politicians. This explosive evidence not only bolstered our case beyond measure but also set off a chain reaction that led to criminal investigations against several individuals once thought untouchable. In a final, dramatic courtroom session that felt like a culmination of every injustice that had ever been inflicted on our community, the judge ruled in our favor. He declared that the fraudulent boundary adjustments were null and void, ordering an immediate cessation of all construction on the disputed land. The ruling was met with jubilant cheers from the courtroom gallery and a storm of questions from reporters. Vanessa Monroe's team scrambled for a response, but it was clear that the scales of justice had finally begun to tip. After the ruling, I returned to the community center where, just a few weeks earlier, nearly 400 residents had gathered. Now, with the court's decision in hand, I addressed the crowd once more. "Today is not just a personal victory," I said, my voice ringing clear and strong. "It is a victory for every homeowner, every resident who has suffered under the weight of corruption and greed. My grandfather built this legacy with his own two hands, and he entrusted me with its care. We will preserve our history, protect our environment, and ensure that our community remains a place where people are treated with dignity and fairness." The applause was thunderous, echoing through the hall like the promise of a new beginning. I took a moment to look into the faces of the people before me, faces that had been filled with doubt and fear but now shone with hope and determination. I then added, "If you believe that our fight for justice and the preservation of our community is one worth winning, please leave your ratings and comments below. Your feedback is the spark that keeps this movement alive, and together, we can ensure that the truth will always prevail." In the months that followed, the battle was far from over. Vanessa Monroe and her cronies continued to fight their corner, launching appeals and attempting to negotiate settlements. But the momentum of our victory and the widespread public support made it impossible for them to regain control. With the help of Ho and Gwyn, our dedicated legal team, and the unwavering resolve of the Meadow Bay Community Coalition, we set about redesigning the development plans to incorporate significant green spaces, conservation easements to protect the natural wetlands, and community facilities that would benefit all residents. The new design balanced modern luxury with the need to honor our heritage and safeguard the environment that had nurtured our community for generations. HOA proved to be an invaluable ally throughout this process. With his meticulous attention to detail and his deep knowledge of property law, he uncovered additional irregularities in the HOA's financial records. His investigations revealed that funds meant for community improvements had been siphoned off into shell companies linked to the association's board members. His findings were shared with local authorities and the media, further galvanizing public outrage and ensuring that our fight was not in vain. I continued to work closely with other community leaders such as Marisol, Mr. Ramirez, and countless unsung heroes who had suffered in silence for too long. We organized weekly meetings, strategizing ways to hold the corrupt officials accountable and to ensure that every resident received a fair and legal title to their home. The community center, once a mere meeting hall, became a hub of activism and empowerment. Workshops on legal rights, environmental conservation, and urban planning were held regularly, fostering a sense of unity and purpose among the residents. One humid afternoon, as I walked along the restored garden paths of what was once my grandfather's neglected estate, I paused to watch children play near a newly constructed community garden. The scent of salt air mixed with the fragrance of blooming coastal flora, and I thought of all the generations that had come before me, each one having fought their own battles, each one leaving behind a legacy of resilience. I could not help but feel a deep gratitude for the sacrifices that had been made, and a fierce determination to ensure that our community would never again be taken advantage of. Then came another twist in our saga. Late one night, as I was returning from a meeting with legal advisors, I found a note slipped under my door. It was typed and signed and read, "Stop your meddling or face the consequences." My blood ran cold as I read it repeatedly, the threat echoing in my mind. I immediately called HOA, who advised me to be cautious but not to be intimidated. "This is exactly what they want," he said. "They hope that by sending a warning, you will back down. But you must not let fear dictate your actions. Our community is counting on you." That note marked the beginning of a series of unsettling events, anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, suspicious vehicles parked outside my house, and even an attempted break-in at the community center. Yet, rather than driving me to despair, these incidents only strengthened our resolve. We increased security measures, formed neighborhood watch groups, and even coordinated with sympathetic local law enforcement officials who were fed up with the corruption. Every new threat was met with a collective response, and the community's determination to reclaim its rights only grew stronger. In the midst of these turbulent times, I found solace in unexpected places. Late one evening, while sitting on the porch of the old mansion with a cup of iced tea, just as my grandfather used to enjoy, I received a visit from HOA. His usually calm demeanor was tinged with urgency as he handed me a thick envelope. "I have something you need to see," he said quietly. Inside were copies of financial records, email correspondence between HOA board members, and detailed meeting minutes that exposed the systematic fraud and embezzlement that had been taking place under the guise of community management. HOA's eyes burned with determination as he added, "This evidence will not only strengthen our case but also force the county to take action. We have everything we need to bring down this crooked operation once and for all." Armed with this new ammunition, I organized a press conference at the community center. Hundreds of residents, local journalists, and community activists filled the hall, their faces a mix of anger and hope. I took the stage and laid out the damning evidence with meticulous detail. I recounted every misdeed, every instance of bureaucratic manipulation, and every fraudulent transaction that had been orchestrated by Vanessa Monroe and her associates. My voice, though steady, carried the weight of a man who had witnessed too much injustice to remain silent any longer. "Today, we expose not only the theft of our land but the theft of our trust," I declared. "We will no longer tolerate a system where power is abused and the voices of the people are silenced. I urge you all to leave your ratings and comments below, to share your support, and to let the world know that our community will fight for justice until every wrong is righted." The reaction was overwhelming. Social media lit up with posts and videos, and soon the story became a national headline. Under mounting pressure from public opinion, the county commissioners were forced to reopen the investigation into the disputed land boundaries and the fraudulent practices of the Sunset Reef Community Association. In a dramatic turn of events, several county officials were indicted on charges of corruption, and the investigation soon revealed a network of collusion that reached deep into local government. Vanessa Monroe, once the epitome of corporate poise, was called to testify before a special committee. In her testimony, she denied all allegations, her voice trembling slightly under the intense scrutiny, but the mountain of evidence left no room for doubt. As the legal battle continued, I found myself at the forefront of a movement that transcended my personal loss. The Meadow Bay Community Coalition, which had grown from a small group of determined residents to a powerful force for change, began to transform the very fabric of Coral Bay. We restructured our local government, established transparent processes for property assessments, and even set up a community fund to support homeowners facing unjust fines. Throughout this process, HOA remained my steadfast ally, guiding our legal strategy and ensuring that every step was taken in accordance with the law. There were moments when the enormity of the task nearly overwhelmed me, nights when I lay awake, haunted by the memory of my grandfather's warm smile and the legacy he had entrusted to me. I would think of all the families whose lives had been upended by the greedy machinations of corrupt developers, and I vowed that their suffering would not be in vain. Every setback, every threat, every heart-wrenching encounter only served to fuel my determination to fight on. One particularly harrowing incident occurred on a stormy night when a group of masked men attempted to vandalize the community center. I received a frantic call from one of our neighborhood watch volunteers, and I rushed to the scene, drenched by the relentless downpour. When I arrived, I found the building defaced with crude slogans and hateful symbols. The sight filled me with both anger and sorrow. This was not just an attack on a building, it was an attack on our community's very soul. I stood there in the rain, watching as the flickering lights of passing cars illuminated the wreckage, and I promised myself that we would rebuild stronger than ever. In the days that followed, the community rallied together in a way that I had never seen before. Volunteers painted over the vandalism, local businesses donated supplies for repairs, and neighbors worked side by side to restore the community center. Amidst the chaos of reconstruction, I found solace in the quiet strength of the people around me. Their resilience reminded me that even in the darkest moments, hope could be reborn from the collective will to overcome injustice. Our legal battles eventually culminated in a landmark ruling that not only restored the original property boundaries but also ordered the cessation of all construction on the disputed land. The decision was a resounding victory for every homeowner in Coral Bay. I remember the day the ruling was announced as if it were etched in my memory forever. The courtroom was filled with tears of relief, and outside, the streets erupted in spontaneous celebration. Banners were waved, and the sound of cheers carried on the wind, mingling with the distant hum of the ocean. Yet, even as the dust began to settle on that hard-fought victory, I knew that our struggle had only just begun. The ruling was a critical first step, but there remained a deep need for systemic change. I continued to work closely with the Meadow Bay Community Coalition, pushing for reforms that would ensure transparency in all future developments and protect the rights of every resident. HOA and I frequently spoke about the importance of using our victory as a foundation for building a more just and equitable Coral Bay. A community where the voices of the people would always be heard and where the legacy of our forefathers would be preserved for generations to come. One warm afternoon, as I sat on the porch of the restored mansion overlooking the reclaimed land, I received a call from a longtime friend who had fought alongside me from the very beginning. "Ethan, the community is buzzing with hope," she said, her voice filled with quiet excitement. "People are saying that our story has inspired others across the state. They are sharing their own experiences of being pushed aside by greedy developers, and they want to join our fight." Her words filled me with an indescribable sense of purpose. I realized that our battle was not merely about property or legal technicalities. It was about reclaiming the dignity of every individual who had ever been marginalized and mistreated. That evening, as twilight descended over Coral Bay and the gentle lapping of the waves provided a soothing counterpoint to the day's triumphs and trials, I took to social media once again. In a heartfelt video message, I recounted the journey from the moment I discovered the truth about my grandfather's estate to our final courtroom victory. I spoke passionately about the need for continued vigilance, for community solidarity, and for every person to stand up against injustice. If you believe in the power of unity and in the right of every family to preserve their legacy, please leave your ratings and comments below, I urged. Your support is the fuel that drives us forward, and together, we can build a future that honors the past while forging a path to true justice. The video went viral, sparking discussions on local news channels and in community forums. People from all walks of life reached out with their own stories, their own struggles against systems designed to exploit the vulnerable. I found myself at the center of a movement that transcended my personal loss and touched the lives of countless others. Every comment, every rating, every shared post was a testament to the enduring spirit of a community that refused to be cowed by corruption and greed. In the months that followed, as our community began to rebuild and reshape its future, I continued to see the ripple effects of our victory. The new development plan for Sunset Reef was redesigned to include expansive green spaces, conservation areas for the coastal wetlands, and community centers that would serve as hubs for civic engagement. The local government, now under intense public scrutiny, embarked on a series of reforms designed to restore trust and transparency in property management. And throughout it all, my dear friend and legal advisor Ho and Gwen remained by my side, a constant reminder that true justice is achieved not through individual heroics alone but through the collective will of a united people. Looking back on the long, arduous journey, I am filled with gratitude for every challenge and every setback that tested our resolve. My grandfather's legacy, once threatened by ruthless developers and crooked officials, now stands as a beacon of hope for Coral Bay. It is a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the truth will eventually prevail when courage and community come together. If you have followed this turbulent yet inspiring journey and found its twists, raw emotions, and fierce fight for justice compelling, please share your rating and comments below. Your voice matters, and together, we can ensure that the fight for fairness, transparency, and the preservation of our heritage continues to resonate far and wide. As the sun set over Coral Bay on that unforgettable day, I stood on the porch of my grandfather's mansion, looking out over fields that had once been marked for destruction but were now the heart of a revitalized community. I could still hear the echoes of protest, the steady beat of collective resolve, and in the distance, the gentle crash of the ocean waves, a constant reminder that nature, much like justice, endures beyond the fleeting shadows of greed. I vowed then and there that our community would remain vigilant, that every time someone tried to undermine our rights, we would respond with the full force of our shared strength and determination. The legacy of my grandfather and the sacrifices of every person who had stood with me would never be forgotten, and the truth would forever be the cornerstone upon which our future was built. In this ongoing struggle, every day is a battle, every voice is a weapon, and every act of courage adds another brick to the foundation of a just society. Our fight is far from over, but as I look out over the fields of Coral Bay, now safe and free, I am reminded that even the smallest spark of truth can ignite a revolution. I invite you once again to join us in this fight for justice. Please leave your thoughts, ratings, and comments below, and let your support be the light that guides us through the darkness. Together, we will ensure that our heritage is preserved, our environment is protected, and our community remains a place where every person is valued and every voice is heard. Thank you for reading my story, for standing with me in this battle, and for believing that no matter how strong the forces of corruption may seem, the power of truth and unity will always prevail.